Why do we sometimes become strangers to ourselves? There is a strange moment that almost everyone experiences, although we rarely talk about it. You are standing in front of a mirror, driving home from work, lying awake at night, or talking to someone you have known for years. Suddenly, for no obvious reason, you notice something about yourself that feels unfamiliar. You hear yourself say something you did not expect to say. You realize you no longer want something you once desperately wanted. You look at an old photograph and barely recognize the person in it. Or perhaps the opposite happens. You look at your life and realize that you have been doing exactly what you were supposed to do: working, studying, loving, planning, succeeding, and yet some part of you quietly asks, when did I become this person? The question sounds simple, but it leads somewhere surprisingly deep. Because who exactly are you? Are you the person you remember being, the person other people think you are, the person you behave like every day, the person you secretly wish you could become? Or is the real you something hidden underneath all of these versions? We often talk about identity as if it were a possession. We say, I know who I am, as though somewhere inside the mind there is a stable little object called me. But human beings are not nearly that simple. We change. Our memories change. Our goals change. Our relationships change us. Fear changes us. Success changes us. Trauma can change us. Love can change us. And sometimes, without noticing, we can spend years becoming someone we never consciously decided to become. That creates one of the strangest experiences in human life: the feeling of being a stranger to yourself. It can be frightening, but it can also reveal something important. Perhaps the problem is not that you have lost yourself. Perhaps the deeper problem is that you were never a single fixed person to begin with. The person in the old photograph. Imagine finding a photograph of yourself from 10 years ago. You recognize the face immediately. You remember where the picture was taken. You may even remember what happened that day. But then something strange happens. You look at the person in the photograph and think, I don't think like that anymore. The face is yours, the memories are yours, the history is yours, and yet the person seems distant. This happens because identity is not only about continuity, it is also about psychological connection. You can know that something happened to you without feeling deeply connected to the person who experienced it. Think about childhood. You know you were once 5 years old. You probably have photographs proving it. You may remember fragments of that time. But you do not wake up every morning feeling like a 5-year-old who happens to be trapped inside an adult body. The child is part of your history, but not necessarily part of your present identity. This creates a puzzle. If you have changed so much, what makes the earlier person you? Philosophers have been arguing about questions like this for centuries. One famous approach says that personal identity depends partly on psychological continuity, things such as memories, intentions, personality, beliefs, and relationships between different stages of a person's life. But psychological continuity is not perfect. You forget things, you change your opinions, you develop new values, your personality shifts, some memories become emotionally distant. So perhaps being the same person does not mean remaining psychologically identical. Maybe it means carrying enough connections from one version of yourself to the next. Like a river. A river can remain the same river even though the water flowing through it is constantly changing. But even that analogy has a problem. A river does not wake up one morning and wonder where the old water went. We do. Your brain was never designed to preserve one perfect self. Part of the reason we feel unfamiliar to ourselves is that the human brain is not a perfect recording device. We tend to imagine memory as something like a video library. An event happens. The brain stores it. Later, we replay it. But human memory is much stranger. When we remember something, we are not simply opening a file. We are reconstructing the experience. That means memory can change. Details can disappear. Other details can become more vivid. Later experiences can influence how we interpret earlier ones. And perhaps most importantly, we tend to remember ourselves through the meaning we give to our past. Suppose you failed at something when you were 20. At the time, you might have thought, I'm terrible at this. 10 years later, after building a successful career, you might remember the same event differently. That failure taught me what I was actually good at. The event did not change. Your interpretation changed. And when your interpretation of your past changes, your understanding of yourself changes with it. This is one reason personal identity can feel unstable. We are constantly rewriting the story that connects our past to our present. Not necessarily because we are lying to ourselves, because the mind needs a story. Human beings are extraordinarily good at turning disconnected experiences into narratives. We say, I have always been this kind of person. But sometimes that is not literally true. We may simply be creating a story that makes our present identity feel coherent. The strange part is that the story can feel more real than the raw facts. The self as a story. Imagine that someone asks you, who are you? You probably will not answer with your height, blood type, or the exact number of cells in your body. You will tell a story. You might mention where you grew up, what you do, who you love, what you believe, what you have experienced, what you want, what you fear, what kind of person you think you are. In other words, you describe yourself through a narrative. Psychologists sometimes talk about this as a person's self-concept or narrative identity. The basic idea is not that you are fictional. It is that your sense of who you are is partly built from the stories you tell yourself about your life. And this creates an interesting possibility. Maybe becoming a stranger to yourself happens when your old story stops explaining your current life. Imagine someone who has always thought, I'm the responsible one. That identity might have developed during childhood. Perhaps they had younger siblings. Maybe their parents depended on them. Maybe being responsible brought approval. So they built a life around being dependable. They became the person who solves problems, the person who never complains, the person who stays calm, the person who says yes. For years, the identity works. Then something changes. They become exhausted. They begin wanting freedom. They start saying no. They discover interests they had ignored. Suddenly, the old identity becomes uncomfortable. They may think, what's wrong with me? This isn't who I am. But perhaps something very different is happening. Nothing is wrong. The old definition of me has simply become too small. We often confuse familiarity with identity. There is another reason we can become strangers to ourselves. We confuse what is familiar with what is authentic. If you have behaved a certain way for 20 years, that behavior begins to feel like you, even if you dislike it, even if it makes you unhappy, even if you chose it originally because someone else expected it. Familiarity has enormous psychological power. Imagine someone who has spent years avoiding conflict. They always agree. They apologize first. They keep their opinions quiet. Everyone around them describes them as easygoing. Eventually, they may believe, I'm just not a confrontational person. But perhaps they are not naturally conflict avoidant. Perhaps they learned that disagreement was dangerous. Maybe earlier in life, expressing anger led to rejection, punishment, or emotional chaos. So they adapted. The adaptation worked, and then it became an identity. This happens constantly. A coping strategy can become a personality trait, a role can become an identity, a survival response can become a lifestyle. And after enough time, we forget that we ever chose it. We simply say, that's who I am. But there is a powerful difference between saying, this is who I am, and this is something I learned to do. The first sounds permanent. The second leaves the door open. The strange power of other people's expectations. Sometimes we become strangers to ourselves because other people have been telling us who we are for so long that their version becomes our own. Parents do this. Friends do it. Teachers do it. Partners do it. Entire cultures do it. You've always been the smart one. You're the quiet one. You're the funny one. You're the difficult one. You're the responsible one. You're not really a creative person. You've always been sensitive. You don't care about money. You're ambitious. You hate change. You love being alone. These statements can sound harmless, but repeated descriptions can become psychological boundaries. If people continually respond to you as though you are a certain kind of person, you may begin behaving in ways that confirm their expectations. Then something fascinating happens. The role becomes self-reinforcing. You act a certain way because people expect it. They expect it because you act that way. And eventually, everyone, including you, forgets where the pattern began. This does not mean other people control us completely. They do not. But human beings are social creatures. Part of knowing who we are comes from seeing how other people respond to us. A child does not construct a complete identity alone. They learn in part through reactions. When I do this, people smile. When I do that, people get angry. This version of me gets attention. That version gets rejected. Over thousands of interactions, a person begins building an internal map. Sometimes that map is useful, sometimes it is badly outdated. What happens when the old identity dies? There is a particular period in life when this feeling can become especially strong. A transition, graduation, moving away, starting a new career, ending a relationship, becoming a parent, losing someone, retirement, immigration, a major failure, a major success, even something as ordinary as getting older. These events can remove the environment that supported an old identity. Imagine a person who has spent 20 years being a certain kind of employee. Then they retire. Suddenly, people stop asking what they do. Their schedule changes, their daily responsibilities disappear, their social environment changes. The identity that organized their life is gone. The frightening question appears, who am I if I'm no longer that person? This is why some major life changes feel strangely empty even when they are objectively positive. The person did not necessarily lose happiness, they lost structure, and structure had been carrying part of their identity. The same thing can happen after a breakup. You may not only lose a partner, you lose the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship. Perhaps you were the girlfriend, the husband, the person who traveled with them, the person who made plans around them, the person who was loved by that particular individual. When the relationship ends, you have to rebuild a self that no longer depends on the old arrangement. That can feel like becoming a stranger, but sometimes it is actually the beginning of becoming acquainted with parts of yourself that were hidden underneath the old role. The people-pleasing paradox. One of the most interesting examples is people-pleasing. A person may spend years becoming extremely good at reading other people's emotions. They know when someone is upset. They know what people want to hear. They avoid disappointing others. They adjust themselves. They become adaptable. From the outside, this may look like kindness. Sometimes it is. But there is a hidden danger. If you constantly ask, what does everyone else need from me? You may stop asking, what do I need? And after enough time, that question can become surprisingly difficult. Someone might say, what do you want to do this weekend? And the answer comes immediately, whatever you want. At first, that sounds generous, but imagine living like that for 20 years. Eventually, you may not know what you want, not because you have no preferences, because you have spent so much time monitoring other people's preferences that your own became quiet. This is one way a person can become a stranger to themselves without noticing. The self does not necessarily disappear, it becomes underused. Why? Sometimes we change and don't notice. There is another puzzle. If we change gradually, why does the change sometimes feel sudden? Because we rarely notice slow internal shifts while they are happening. Imagine watching a child grow. If you see them every day, the changes are almost invisible. If you see them after 5 years, the difference can be shocking. Something similar happens psychologically. Your beliefs change one conversation at a time. Your priorities change one experience at a time. Your personality changes through thousands of small interactions. Your tolerance for certain behavior changes. Your dreams change, your fears change, your relationships change. Then one ordinary morning, you suddenly realize, I don't want the life I used to want. It feels sudden, but it probably wasn't. The change happened quietly. You simply reached the point where it became impossible not to notice. The person you pretend to be can become real. This creates an even stranger possibility. Sometimes we deliberately pretend to be someone we are not. At first, the performance is obvious. You act confident even though you are nervous. You behave professionally even though you feel lost. You pretend not to care. You pretend to be independent. You pretend to be mature. You pretend to be happy. But behavior has a peculiar relationship with identity. Repeated behavior can influence how we actually feel and think. This does not mean fake it until you magically become someone else. It means that identity and behavior influence each other. You behave in a certain way because you believe you are a certain kind of person. But then behaving that way can strengthen the belief. A person who repeatedly acts courageous may become more comfortable with courage. A person who repeatedly sets boundaries may begin to see themselves as someone whose needs matter. A person who repeatedly avoids everything difficult may increasingly see themselves as incapable. So the boundary between pretending and becoming is not always clear. Sometimes we practice an identity before we fully believe it, and sometimes we accidentally practice an identity we never wanted. The darker possibility: what if you never knew yourself? At this point, we can ask a more unsettling question. What if the idea of a true self is partly an illusion? We often imagine that somewhere beneath our habits, social roles, memories, and fears, there is a pure version of ourselves waiting to be discovered. The authentic self, the real me, the person I was always meant to be. It is an attractive idea, but there is no scientific evidence showing that each person contains one single, permanent psychological essence waiting to be uncovered. Human beings appear to be more complicated. We have different tendencies in different situations. You can be generous with one person and selfish with another, confident at work and insecure in love, patient with children and impatient with adults, brave in a crisis and terrified of ordinary things. These contradictions do not necessarily mean one version is fake. They may simply reveal that human personality is context sensitive. The self may be less like a statue and more like an ecosystem. Many parts interact. Some are loud, some are quiet, some appear only under certain conditions, some compete, some cooperate, and the balance changes over time. This idea can be uncomfortable because we want certainty. We want to say, this is who I am. But perhaps a more accurate sentence is, this is how I tend to be, given the life I have lived so far. That sounds less satisfying, but it may be closer to reality. Tash Cha, the multiple selves inside one person. Consider how different you can feel in different environments. There is the version of you who talks to family, the version who talks to close friends, the version who enters a workplace, the version who meets a stranger, the version who is alone, the version who falls in love, the version who becomes frightened, the version who is angry, the version who feels safe. Which one is the real you? Maybe the question is based on a false assumption. Perhaps all of them are, not because we are fake, but because different parts of us become active under different circumstances. A quiet person can have an intense inner world. A confident person can carry enormous insecurity. A loving person can feel resentment. A rational person can make irrational decisions. A person who values freedom can desperately want security. Human beings contain contradictions. We often treat contradiction as evidence that we do not know ourselves. But perhaps contradiction is part of knowing ourselves. You are not a perfectly consistent character in a novel. You are a living system responding to changing conditions. The brain is constantly predicting who you will be. There is an even deeper layer to this. Your brain does not simply observe the world, it constantly predicts what is likely to happen next. This predictive ability helps us survive. You do not consciously calculate every movement when you walk. You do not analyze every facial expression from scratch. You do not consciously rebuild your entire understanding of the world every morning. Your brain uses previous experience to anticipate what comes next, and this applies to yourself too. You develop expectations about your own behavior. I don't do things like that. I'm not good at relationships. I always panic. I'm terrible with money. I never finish anything. These statements can become predictions, and predictions influence attention and behavior. If you expect to fail, you may notice evidence of failure more strongly. If you expect rejection, you may interpret ambiguous behavior as rejection. If you believe you are incapable of change, you may abandon experiments before they have enough time to work. This creates a loop. Belief, behavior, evidence, stronger belief. The loop can make identity feel permanent, but the fact that a pattern is stable does not mean it is eternal. It may simply mean the system has been reinforcing itself. Why we sometimes hate the person we have become. There is a painful version of this experience. You look at your behavior and realize you do not like the person you are becoming. Maybe you have become cynical. Maybe you are constantly angry. Maybe you have become obsessed with achievement. Maybe you are emotionally distant. Maybe you no longer recognize your own priorities. The natural reaction is often shame. This is who I am now. But shame can make the problem worse. If you interpret an unwanted behavior as proof of a permanently defective identity, change becomes harder. Consider the difference between these two statements. I am a selfish person, and I have been behaving selfishly. The first turns behavior into identity. The second leaves room for responsibility and change. This does not mean we should avoid responsibility. Quite the opposite. If you say, that's just who I am, you can use identity as an excuse. If you say, I have been acting this way, you are forced to confront the behavior. But you are also allowed to believe that tomorrow's behavior can be different. That distinction is incredibly important. The mystery of the inner voice. There is another reason we sometimes feel disconnected from ourselves. We do not always know where our thoughts come from. A thought appears. I should leave. I want this. I don't trust that person. I need to change my life. And we experience it as my thought. But what exactly makes it ours? Our thoughts are influenced by memories, language, culture, relationships, fears, habits, hormones, physical states, and countless experiences we did not consciously choose. You did not invent the language in which you think. You did not choose your earliest emotional experiences. You did not consciously design your instincts. You did not decide which childhood experiences would become emotionally powerful. Yet all of these things participate in the construction of what feels like me. This raises an old philosophical problem. If so much of what happens inside us has causes we did not consciously choose, how much of the self is actually under our control? That question connects identity to another mystery, free will. Maybe we are not the absolute authors of ourselves. Maybe we are partly the result of forces we inherit and experience. But that does not necessarily mean we have no agency. A person may not choose their starting conditions, but they can sometimes influence what happens next. Perhaps freedom is not the ability to create yourself from nothing. Perhaps it is the ability to participate in your own becoming. When the mask becomes comfortable, we often imagine a mask as something uncomfortable, but sometimes masks become comfortable. A person can become so skilled at playing a role that they stop questioning it. The successful person, the strong person, the funny person, the independent person, the intellectual person, the calm person, the rebel, the victim, the caretaker. Even the broken person can become an identity. This is important because identities provide benefits. They tell us how to behave. They tell other people how to treat us. They give us belonging. They reduce uncertainty. If you know you are the responsible one, you know what to do when something goes wrong. If you know you are the funny one, you know how to enter a room. If you know you are the strong one, you know what role to play when everyone else is falling apart. Letting go of the identity can therefore feel dangerous. Who will you be without it? Sometimes the fear of losing yourself is actually the fear of losing the social rewards attached to a particular version of yourself. Why familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. This is one of the strangest things about human behavior. We do not always choose what is best for us. Sometimes we choose what is familiar, even when familiar means painful. Imagine someone who has lived with constant stress for years. They finally get an opportunity to live differently. At first, peace feels uncomfortable. They do not know what to do with it. There is no crisis to solve, no emergency, no problem demanding attention. Instead of feeling relieved, they may feel restless. Why? Because the nervous system has adapted to the old environment. The absence of danger can initially feel strange. This is one reason change can be difficult, even when we consciously want it. We are not only leaving a bad situation, we are leaving a familiar psychological world. And the brain does not always distinguish between familiar and safe. Sometimes familiar simply means predictable. The identity crisis. Nobody warned you about. We tend to associate identity crises with dramatic moments. A person quits their job, moves to another country, shaves their head, changes careers, has a philosophical breakdown at 3 a.m. But identity crises can be much quieter. You may simply realize that the goals motivating you no longer matter. You may stop caring about impressing people. You may become less interested in status. You may want a slower life. You may discover that the dream you spent 10 years chasing was never really yours. That last one can be particularly painful. Because when a dream dies, you do not only lose the future, you lose the person you imagined becoming. Maybe you thought, when I achieve this, I will finally become the person I want to be. Then you achieve it, and nothing magical happens. The achievement feels good, perhaps even wonderful. But afterward, the question remains, now what? This can be terrifying, but it can also be liberating. Because sometimes the identity crisis begins when an inherited goal finally loses its power. The difference between losing yourself and outgrowing yourself. There is a subtle but important distinction here. Sometimes becoming unfamiliar to yourself is a sign that something is wrong. You may be disconnected from your values. You may be living under enormous pressure. You may be suppressing emotions. You may be behaving in ways that contradict what matters to you. But sometimes unfamiliarity is healthy. A person who has spent years being afraid may become more courageous. They may look at themselves and think, I don't recognize this version of me. That's not necessarily a problem. A person who once accepted everything may learn to say no. A person who once needed constant approval may become more independent. A person who once believed they had to be perfect may become comfortable making mistakes. Growth often feels strange while it is happening. We should not assume that every unfamiliar version of ourselves is false. Sometimes the unfamiliar version is simply newer. The paradox of authenticity. We often hear advice like, just be yourself. It sounds wonderful, but it hides a difficult question. Which self? The self from childhood? The self from 5 years ago? The self your family knows? The self you are at work? The self you are when nobody is watching? And if you are changing, what does your self even mean? Maybe authenticity is not about discovering one permanent identity. Maybe authenticity is about reducing the distance between your actions and your deepest values. You can change your personality, change your interests, change your goals, change your relationships, change your mind, and still be authentic. Authenticity may not mean remaining the same. It may mean being honest about who you are now. That is a much more demanding idea because it requires admitting, I don't want this anymore. I was wrong. I changed. I don't know. I used to believe that, but I don't anymore. People know me as one kind of person, but I am becoming someone different. There is courage in those sentences. So, who are you? Perhaps the deepest mistake is expecting a final answer. We ask, who am I? As though there is a sentence that will solve the problem forever. But maybe identity is less like a photograph and more like a conversation. You are influenced by your past, but you are not only your past. You are shaped by other people, but you are not merely their expectations. You have habits, but you are not identical to your habits. You have memories, but your memories are not the whole of you. You have desires, but desires change. You have fears, but fear does not define everything you can become, and you contain contradictions. Lots of them. Perhaps the self is not the thing that remains unchanged. Perhaps the self is the continuity through change, the thread connecting one version of you to another. Sometimes the thread becomes difficult to see, but it may still be there. The stranger in the mirror. Imagine meeting yourself 20 years from now. You walk into a room. You see a person you recognize only gradually. They have different priorities, different habits, different relationships, maybe even different beliefs. They look at you and smile. And you realize something unsettling. They are you. But they are also someone you have not met yet. That future person does not exist in exactly the same form today. They will be shaped by experiences you cannot predict. Some will be wonderful, some will hurt, some will change you in ways you cannot imagine. And that means the person you will become is partly a stranger. But this is true in both directions. The person you are today is also a stranger to your past self, and yet somehow the two of you belong to the same life. Maybe that is the central mystery. We spend our lives trying to discover who we are while simultaneously creating the person we will eventually become. The self is not merely something we find, it is something that keeps happening. The quiet question beneath it all. So why do we sometimes become strangers to ourselves? Because the self is not as fixed as it feels. Because memory changes, because circumstances change, because relationships change us, because roles become identities, because coping strategies become habits, because other people's expectations can become our own beliefs, because our brains construct stories that make our lives feel coherent, because different parts of us emerge in different situations, and because we are constantly becoming someone we have never been before. But perhaps there is a more hopeful interpretation. Maybe becoming a stranger to yourself is sometimes an invitation to become curious again. Instead of immediately asking, "What's wrong with me?" you can ask, "What changed?" Instead of, "Why am I not who I used to be?" you can ask, "What did I learn?" Instead of, "Which version of me is the real one?" you can ask, "What matters to me now?" Those questions do not produce instant answers. They are better than that. They create space. And sometimes that is what we need, because the goal may not be to return to an older version of yourself. The person you were is gone in some ways. And that is not necessarily a tragedy. You do not need to become your younger self again. You do not even need to uncover some perfectly authentic self hidden underneath everything. You may simply need to pay attention to the person who is emerging. The person who says no after years of saying yes. The person who changes their mind. The person who discovers a new desire. The person who finally admits they are tired. The person who realizes they have been living according to someone else's definition of success. The person who is still uncertain. The person who does not have everything figured out. That person may feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean false. Sometimes the stranger in the mirror is not someone you have lost. Sometimes it is someone you have just begun to meet. And perhaps the most unsettling truth about being human is that this meeting never really ends. You will keep changing. You will keep forgetting. You will keep remembering. You will lose parts of yourself. You will recover parts you thought were gone. You will become someone your younger self would not recognize. And one day, if you are lucky, you may look back at all those different versions of yourself and realize that none of them was the whole story. They were chapters, not separate people, not perfectly consistent people, just different arrangements of the same unfinished life. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, "I don't recognize myself anymore," perhaps don't rush to fear the unfamiliar. Pause, look a little longer, ask what changed, ask what stayed, ask what you are carrying forward, and then ask the strangest question of all. If I am still becoming myself, how could I possibly have known exactly who I was supposed to be? Maybe we do not become strangers to ourselves because we have failed to find who we really are. Maybe we become strangers because, for as long as we are alive, there is always more of us left to discover.